I was still shaking as the airbag deflated, but my sister, Brielle, stood with her hands on her hips, smirking. "You'll forgive me. Mom and Dad will make you." The slam into my new car wasn't an accident. It was a test of our family's power. What Brielle didn't know was that the car had a dual-facing dash cam, and her employee badge had just swiped her into my company's garage. I buckled my seatbelt, staring through the shattered glass. Nobody makes me forgive you here. My name is Avery Shaw. The first thing I processed wasn't the sound, but the pressure. A deep, violent shove that felt like the building itself had decided to punch my car. The world became a chaotic symphony of tearing metal and shattering glass, punctuated by the brutal, soft explosion of the airbag. For a moment, there was only white nylon, the smell of burnt talc and hot plastic, and the frantic, high-pitched chime of a car that knew it was fundamentally broken. The garage on the third floor of the Rook and Vale Analytics headquarters was usually a sanctuary of silence after 7 on a Friday. Tonight, at 7:41 p.m., it was a crime scene. A light, miserable rain whispered against the concrete structure, the dampness seeping into the air. The long fluorescent tubes above flickered, casting a sterile, buzzing light over the tableau. My brand-new sedan, a modest but significant purchase I'd made just 3 weeks prior, was crumpled inwards on the driver's side. The offending vehicle, a hulking black SUV registered to Brielle's latest ex-boyfriend, was wedged against it, its engine still rumbling with a guttural satisfaction. As the airbag sagged, revealing the spider-webbed windshield, I saw my sister. Brielle was already out of the SUV, standing with her hands planted on her hips, her designer jacket unblemished. There was no panic in her eyes, no concern. Instead, a familiar, infuriating smirk played on her lips. It was the same smirk she'd worn after breaking my favorite doll as a child, the same one she'd flashed after accidentally spilling wine on my prom dress. It was the smirk of someone who had never faced a real consequence. "You'll forgive me," she said, her voice carrying easily in the cavernous space. "Mom and Dad will make you." My ears were ringing. My shoulder throbbed where the seatbelt had locked against my collarbone. But my mind, trained by years of risk assessment and compliance protocols, was startlingly clear. This wasn't an accident. An accident involves surprise, regret. This was a statement, a calculated maneuver in the long, exhausting power dynamics of our family, executed on my turf. Brielle sighed, a theatrical sound of mild inconvenience. "Oops," she added, kicking at a piece of my broken headlight on the floor. "Anyway, you have insurance. It's what it's for." She was right. I had insurance, but I also had a dual-facing dashcam that had been recording since the moment I started the engine. And, more importantly, I had a log, an immutable, time-stamped record showing that Brielle's employee access card had been used to enter this secure corporate parking garage precisely 1 minute before impact. She wasn't even supposed to be here. Her contract work for the day had ended hours ago. Ignoring the pain in my neck, I reached for my phone. My hands had a slight tremor, the body's delayed reaction to the violence, but my fingers were steady as they navigated the app. I found the video file, its thumbnail showing the SUV's grille filling the frame. I hit Save and Upload to Cloud. A green checkmark appeared. Then, I took a screenshot of the car's GPS location. A pin dropped neatly on the third floor of 117B Corporate Drive. Evermere, data, clean, objective, and irrefutable. Brielle, meanwhile, had her own phone out. She held it aloft, turning her back to me slightly but ensuring her voice was loud enough to be an announcement. "Mom? Hey, yeah, I'm fine. Listen, I sort of dinged Avery's car in her work garage. It's just a scratch. But you know how she gets. Can you just call her and tell her not to make a big deal out of it?" A scratch. I looked at the passenger door, which was now a concave ruin of metal and safety glass. The B-pillar was likely compromised. The frame was probably bent. It wasn't a scratch. It was an execution. I disconnected my phone from the car's dying Bluetooth and dialed 3 numbers. 911, what is your emergency?" a calm voice asked. My own voice came out even calmer, stripped of all emotion. It was my work voice, the one I used to depose employees suspected of fraud. I'm at 117B Corporate Drive, in the third-floor parking garage. I've been involved in a vehicle collision, no serious injuries, but my vehicle is not drivable. I require a police officer to file a report. There was a pause. I added, "The other driver appears to have intentionally struck my vehicle. I'd like to request a field sobriety test." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Brielle's posture stiffen. Her phone call with our mother ended abruptly. "Are you serious?" she hissed, her voice losing its performative nonchalance. "You're calling the cops? On me?" "I'm filing a report about a vehicle collision," I stated, my eyes fixed on the cracked windshield. "The identity of the other driver is a fact to be recorded." Before she could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Mom!" I let it ring twice, then answered, putting it on speaker. "Avery, honey, what is going on? Brielle said it was a little tap." Her voice was laced with the practiced, soothing tone she used to smooth over any and all family conflicts, which always meant smoothing things in Brielle's favor. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a situation," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "There has been an accident. The police are on their way. My car has a camera. My company has cameras. My insurance has been notified. This is non-negotiable." A stunned silence crackled over the line. For my entire life, family disputes were handled in-house, with a currency of guilt, obligation, and emotional blackmail. I had just refused to trade in that currency. The distant wail of a siren grew steadily closer, echoing up the concrete ramps. Brielle's face had paled. The smirk was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine panic. This was an unscheduled deviation from the script she'd lived by her entire life. 2 officers arrived, their professionalism a stark contrast to the simmering family drama. They took our statements separately. I provided my license, registration, and a concise, factual account of the event. I watched as the other officer spoke to Brielle, who had seamlessly shifted into her damsel-in-distress persona, complete with trembling hands and wide, innocent eyes. He administered a breathalyzer test, which, to my slight surprise, she passed. The recklessness wasn't fueled by alcohol, but by pure, unadulterated entitlement. After surveying the damage, the senior officer confirmed what I already knew. "Ma'am, both vehicles are going to need a tow." He handed me a slip of paper with a report number on it. As the tow truck driver began the noisy, laborious process of hooking up my ruined sedan, Brielle walked over to me. The officers were finishing their paperwork a short distance away. She leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "You'll drop this," she said, and then she winked, a slow, deliberate wink that said, "The real power is about to be brought to bear. You will fold, just like you always do. Mom and Dad will handle the tow. They'll get the car fixed. You just need to call them and tell them you're not pressing charges. It's an insurance thing now. That's it." I didn't look at her. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my work ID. I angled the plastic card in the dim light, watching the holographic logo of Rook and Vale Analytics shimmer over the reflection of the wreckage. The company's motto was printed beneath it. Clarity and complexity. My job, as a compliance lead, was to enforce that clarity, to ensure that rules were applied equally, without favoritism or fear. For years, I had kept my work life and my family life in 2 separate, carefully sealed containers. Brielle had just crashed through that wall. I held the ID card, the smooth plastic a solid, grounding presence in my hand. I looked from the logo to the shattered glass of my car, and then finally, I met my sister's gaze. "No," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "The rules are different here." On paper, the Shaw family was a pillar of the Evermere community. To the outside world, we were the embodiment of quiet grace and civic duty. My parents, Michael and Eleanor Shaw, ran the Evermere Community Trust, a local charitable foundation that funded everything from library renovations to scholarships for underprivileged students. They were a handsome, smiling couple, frequently pictured in the local newspaper cutting ribbons or shaking hands with the mayor. They were, by all accounts, good people, and good people, as everyone in Evermere knew, raised good children. That's where the narrative began to fray. I am Avery Shaw, 29 years old, by title. I am the lead for compliance operations at Rook & Vale Analytics, one of the largest data firms in the state. In practice, I am the person who ensures the company's machinery runs according to a very strict, very unforgiving set of rules. I investigate internal fraud, enforce codes of conduct, and sign off on reports that can end careers. My job is to find the objective truth in a swamp of human behavior and to act on it without sentiment. I live in a world of verifiable data, audit trails, and policy-driven consequences. My sister, Brielle, is 26. She is a contract recruiting assistant, also at Rook & Vale, a placement I reluctantly helped her secure after she'd burned through 3 other jobs in 2 years. Unlike me, Brielle's world is not one of data, but of people. She is effortlessly charming, knows half the city by name, and can navigate any social situation with a disarming smile. Her professional currency is likability. Mine is integrity. We worked in the same building, under the same corporate banner, but we might as well have been on different planets. Our roles within the family were forged in early childhood. I was the responsible one. I was the daughter who did her homework without being asked, who remembered birthdays, who saved her allowance. I was dependable, predictable, and, as a result, largely invisible. Brielle was the one who needs us. She was the whirlwind of scraped knees, forgotten assignments, and tearful last-minute pleas for help. She was the project, the ongoing rescue mission that gave our parents a sense of purpose. My successes were expected. Brielle's survival was a celebrated victory. I remember when I was 12, I spent a month meticulously building a scale model of a medieval castle for a history fair. It was a masterpiece of cardboard, glue, and painstaking detail. The night before it was due, Brielle, then 9, decided to see if her Barbie dolls could live in it. The central keep collapsed. When I discovered the ruin, my rage was volcanic. My parents rushed in, not to assess the damage, but to manage the emotions. My father knelt beside a sobbing Brielle, while my mother put a placating hand on my shoulder. "Honey, she didn't mean it," she'd said, a line that could serve as the epigraph for Brielle's entire life. The conflict was never resolved. It was absorbed. My parents' primary directive was the avoidance of unpleasantness. Their solution, repeated ad nauseum throughout our lives, was to push us into a room and command, "Sisters need to work this out." But it was never a negotiation between equals. Working it out was a euphemism for my unconditional surrender. I was older, I was more mature, and therefore it was my responsibility to absorb the cost, forgive the transgression, and restore the family's placid equilibrium. I stayed up all night rebuilding the castle into a passable, mediocre version of its former self. I got a B-. Brielle was tucked into bed with a story and a kiss. I learned a valuable lesson. In the Shaw family, accountability was my burden and forgiveness was my duty. This dynamic was underpinned by their favorite mantra, a phrase they wielded like a sacred text: family first, work second. It was their answer to everything. It was the reason I had to leave a high school debate tournament early to pick Brielle up from a party she wasn't supposed to be at. It was the reason I had to co-sign the lease on her first apartment, a lease she eventually broke, leaving me to deal with the financial fallout. It was the reason I was expected to overlook her casual disregard for promises, appointments, and other people's property, because family came first. The irony was that my work, the very thing they relegated to second place, was a direct refutation of their entire philosophy. Rook & Vale didn't become a multi-million-dollar analytics firm by putting personal feelings before professional obligations. The entire structure of corporate compliance is built to defend against the very things my family championed: nepotism, favoritism, and the quiet, behind-the-scenes erasure of wrongdoing for the sake of keeping someone out of trouble. My job was literally to prevent the company from operating like my family. I was paid to ensure that everyone, from the CEO to a contract assistant, was subject to the same set of rules. Over the years, the peacekeeping calls from my parents had been remarkably effective. Just last year, Brielle had borrowed a valuable client contact list from a shared server at work to pass along to a friend at a rival company. It was a minor but clear breach of data security policy. When the system flagged the unauthorized access, I saw her name and my stomach dropped. Before I could even decide on the proper protocol, my father called. "Avery, I heard about a little mix-up at the office," he began, his voice smooth as honey. "Brielle is just devastated. She clicked on the wrong file. You know how she is with technology. It would be a shame for her to get a black mark on her record for such a silly mistake. We'll talk to her. It won't happen again. Just make it go away. Honey, family first." And I did. I logged the incident as a system error, a ghost in the machine. I lectured Brielle in private, and she looked at me with bored, resentful eyes, already thinking about her weekend plans. I compromised my professional ethics for the sake of family peace. The guilt of it sat like a stone in my gut for months. I had let them win. I had let them make me complicit. But the crash in the parking garage was different. This wasn't a misplaced file on a server. This was twisted metal and thousands of dollars in damages. This happened in physical space, on corporate property under video surveillance. This time, there were police officers and an official report number. This time, there was hard, undeniable data. The dashcam footage, the GPS logs, the security card swipes. These were not things that could be made to go away with a phone call. This was my world, the world of evidence, and Brielle had driven right into the middle of it. Standing there in the cold, damp air of the garage, with the reflection of my company's logo shimmering on the shattered glass, I made a decision. I was done working it out. I was done absorbing the cost. For my entire life, I had been told to put family first, but their definition of family was a one-way street of sacrifice, always flowing from me to her. They demanded a loyalty that was never reciprocated. My career was built on a simple premise. Rules create a fair and stable system. Without them, there is only chaos and favoritism. Brielle, and by extension, my parents, had spent a lifetime treating me as an exception to their own rules of love and respect. Now, standing on the one piece of ground where my rules held sway, they expected me to suspend them for her benefit. I decided it was time to turn their favorite slogan inside out. It was time to show them that family does not come before the law. Not here, not anymore. The weekend was a storm of silent calls and pleading texts from my parents, all of which I ignored. I responded to each with the same pre-written message. I am following the advice of my insurance company and the police. I cannot discuss the details of an active investigation. The digital stonewall was something they had never encountered from me before, and their escalating panic was palpable through the screen. But their world of emotional leverage had no jurisdiction in mine. On Monday morning, the gears of the machine I served began to turn. At 8:05 a.m., a company-wide email landed in every Rook and Vale employee's inbox. The subject line was bland, functional. Incident report, third-floor parking structure. The body was equally sterile. On the evening of Friday, October 12th, a vehicle collision occurred in the third-floor parking structure involving company personnel. Corporate security and local law enforcement responded. There were no injuries reported. We remind all employees to adhere to the posted speed limits and report any incidents immediately. The area has been cleared. It was a masterpiece of corporate non-communication. It said everything and nothing, but for those who knew, it was a declaration. The incident was no longer a private matter between sisters. It was now a line item on a corporate ledger, an official case file. It had been ingested into the system. According to the Rook and Vale Corporate Governance Charter, Section 4, Subsection B, any incident occurring on company property involving company assets or personnel that results in property damage or potential liability must be reported to Corporate Security and the Compliance Operations Division. As the lead for compliance operations, I was, by definition, the co-manager of this investigation. My signature was on the very protocol that dictated the next steps. This was my first, and most critical, strategic move. At 8:15 a.m., I walked into the office of David Chen, the head of corporate security, a formidable ex-detective with an unwavering loyalty to procedure. I didn't sit down. "David," I began, my tone formal. "Regarding the incident on Friday evening, I am officially recusing myself from all oversight and decision-making capacities." He raised an eyebrow, his face impassive. "Conflict of interest?" "The other involved party is my sister, Brielle Shaw," I stated. "My involvement would compromise the integrity of the investigation, as per Section 7, subsection D of the Charter." He gave a slow, deliberate nod. He appreciated the commitment to protocol. It was the language we both spoke. "Understood. Who's your designated acting lead?" "Markham," I replied. "He's by the book." "He is," David agreed. "What evidence are you submitting as the reporting party?" I placed a sealed, tamper-proof evidence bag on his desk. "This contains a USB drive with the complete, unedited dashcam footage from my vehicle, both forward and cabin-facing. It includes a time-stamped log of the files transferred to a secure cloud server, performed at the scene. Also included are a screenshot of the vehicle's GPS location at the time of impact and the official police report number." I was no longer a sister. I was a reporting party. I was a witness. I was a cog in the procedural machine I had helped to build. I handed over the evidence, signed a chain of custody form that David produced, and walked out. The trap was set, but my hands were clean. My next stop was Human Resources. I requested a brief, formal meeting with the director, Linda Harrison. We discussed Brielle's employment status. "Just to be clear, Linda," I said, adopting a tone of professional inquiry, "Brielle Shaw is on a fixed-term contract through a third-party agency, correct?" Linda pulled up her file. "That's correct. Her contract is with us, but she's not a permanent employee. Why do you ask?" "Her contract stipulates adherence to all Rook and Vale codes of conduct, same as a full-time employee?" "Absolutely," Linda confirmed, her expression becoming more serious. "The behavioral clauses are identical. Is this related to the incident report from security?" "I've recused myself from that investigation," I said smoothly. "I'm just clarifying policy for my own records." But the point was made. A contractor, especially one with a history of job hopping, had no institutional goodwill to fall back on. She was a line item, a temporary resource, and utterly disposable if she became a liability. By midday, the internal investigation team, a joint task force of security and Markham from my own department, had already pulled the relevant data streams. The evidence mounted with sterile digital precision. They had the main security camera footage from the garage, which, while grainy, clearly showed the SUV stationary for nearly a minute before accelerating directly into my parked car. There was no swerve, no indication of a mistake. Then came my dashcam footage. The forward-facing camera showed the impact in brutal high definition, but the cabin-facing camera was the linchpin. It clearly showed Brielle in the driver's seat of the SUV, her face illuminated by her phone screen just moments before she looked up, aimed the vehicle, and drove forward. The audio captured her smug pronouncement after the crash. It was an open and shut case of intentional damage. But the team kept digging, because that's what they were trained to do. They cross-referenced the timeline with Brielle's access card log. Her card was used to enter the garage at 7:40 p.m., a full 3 hours after her contracted shift had ended. A query of company expense reports and vendor logs turned up another data point. At 7:18 p.m., a corporate credit card belonging to Brielle's ex-boyfriend, the SUV's owner, was used to pay a $78 tab at the Gilded Glass, a bar 2 blocks from our office. He was out of the country on a business trip, a fact confirmed by his own company's travel department. Brielle had his car and his credit card. She had been drinking just before deciding to come back to the office to settle a score. While the internal gears were turning, I took my own parallel steps, completely separate from my role at Rook and Vale. I logged into my personal insurance portal and uploaded the police report number and the dashcam footage. I filled out the claim form with meticulous detail, describing the event as a deliberate act of vehicular assault. I used the language of risk, not the language of family. This brought me to the most significant risk factor of all, one my family, in their arrogance, would never see coming. I drafted a memo to Markham and David, sent from my work email to create a formal time-stamped record. Subject: potential for witness influence. Markham, David, I wrote. Given the familial relationship between myself and the other party involved in Incident 734A, I anticipate there may be external attempts to pressure me into withdrawing my statement or altering my testimony to the police and insurance. Please be advised that any such communication, whether from the other party or from third parties acting on her behalf, could constitute witness tampering and interference with an internal investigation. A Level 2 violation of the Corporate Code of Conduct. I will forward any such communications to you for the official record. It was a warning shot, fired through official channels. I was preemptively classifying my parents' inevitable peacekeeping phone calls as a corporate crime. I was taking their greatest weapon, emotional blackmail, and turning it into evidence against their favored daughter. That evening, I sat in my quiet apartment, the silence a welcome reprieve. My phone rang. It was my father. I took a deep breath, let it ring one more time, and answered, putting the call on speaker and pressing the record button on a secondary device. The family wanted to play. Now, they had to play by my rules. The game had changed, and they didn't even know it yet. Family wasn't above the law. It was about to become a case study in why the law exists. My father's call was exactly what I'd anticipated, a carefully constructed monologue of paternal concern that was, in reality, a strategic deployment of guilt. He spoke of our mother's distress, the family's reputation, the potential for scandal at the trust. He never once asked if I was okay. He was not mediating a conflict. He was conducting a damage control operation. I listened, offered non-committal and professionally vague responses, and recorded every word. When he hung up, frustrated by my new, impenetrable wall of corporate jargon, I saved the file and forwarded it to Markham with a single line, for the official record. But my conversation with my father had planted a seed. It wasn't just the blatant manipulation, it was the practiced ease with which he did it. This felt like a well-rehearsed play, and I was the only one who didn't know her lines. A compliance officer's mind is trained to see patterns, to identify the telltale signs of systemic weakness. My family, I realized, was a system with a critical flaw, and I had a suspicion that the crash on Friday wasn't the first exploit. Driven by an instinct honed over years of combing through data logs for anomalies, I logged into the Rook and Vale security backend from my encrypted home laptop on Tuesday morning. I had the access credentials, but I was careful, routing my query through a general search protocol that wouldn't flag my specific user ID as the source. I pulled up the incident log for the P3 parking structure, filtering for the last 3 months. The records were mostly mundane: a dead battery, a report of a suspicious person who turned out to be a new employee who forgot their floor. Then I found it, the first anomaly, 6 weeks ago. A report filed by an employee in the marketing department. The rear bumper of their car had been significantly dented while parked near the north elevators. No note was left. The security footage was inconclusive, the angle obscured by a concrete pillar. The incident was logged as an unidentified vehicle, but the description the employee gave of the car they had parked next to earlier that day was telling: a large, late-model black SUV. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I cross-referenced the date and time of the incident with Brielle's work schedule and her access card logs. Her contract hours ended at 4 p.m. on Tuesdays. That day, she had badged out of the building at 7:12 p.m. She had been in the building, after hours, when the incident occurred. 1 data point is an anomaly. 2 is a coincidence. 3 is a pattern. I kept digging. I found a second incident, logged just 2 weeks prior. A deep, long scrape along the side of a concrete support column on a tight turn. The P3 maintenance crew had filed the report, noting black paint transfer. They'd requested a security review to identify the driver, but the request was marked closed, insufficient evidence. The timestamp on the maintenance report was a Wednesday morning. I pulled Brielle's logs for the previous day. Sure enough, she had stayed late again, badging out of the garage at 8:45 p.m. I remembered that day. She had called me in a panic because she'd missed a deadline on a recruiting report. I had spent an hour on the phone walking her through the process, calming her down. She had been emotional, frantic, and then, it seemed, she'd driven away angry. The SUV, the late hours, the proximity to a personal or professional drama, the pieces were starting to form a mosaic. This wasn't just about my car. This was a behavioral signature. Brielle used the SUV as an outlet, a blunt instrument for her frustrations, shielded by the assumption that the consequences would be absorbed by others or simply erased. The investigation became an obsession, branching out from the corporate database into the messier world of public information. I thought about her text messages, her casual boasts. I had a shared acquaintance with one of Brielle's closer friends, a woman who had always been polite but distant with me. I took a chance and sent her a carefully worded text, appealing not to gossip, but to a shared sense of professional frustration. I'm dealing with a difficult situation involving Brielle and a work-related incident, I wrote. I have a feeling this isn't the first time. Any insight you have would be confidential and deeply appreciated. The reply came back faster than I expected. It was a screenshot from a group chat dated the day of the crash. Brielle had written, OMG, I'm so mad at Avery. She's being impossible about the quarterly planning. Might have to go teach her car a lesson, LOL. A reply from a friend said, Don't do anything crazy. Brielle's response was the key that unlocked everything. Whatever. If she freaks out, Mom and Dad will handle it. They always do. It was there in black and white, premeditation, the absolute certainty of a parental safety net. This wasn't an act of passion. It was a calculated risk, with the cost already outsourced to our parents' emotional checkbook. My next step was to look into the SUV itself. A quick search of public records confirmed my suspicion. The vehicle was registered to her ex-boyfriend, and a further search of his driving record on a public database turned up a significant detail. His license had been temporarily suspended 2 months ago for an accumulation of speeding tickets. The suspension was still active. Brielle was not only driving a car that wasn't hers, she was driving it illegally, a fact that would send any insurance company's legal team into a frenzy. The digital evidence was a mountain, but I needed a human voice to ground it. I remembered the night security guard, a kind older man named George who had worked at Rook and Vale for a decade. I found him making his rounds the next evening. I didn't mention the investigation. I just said I was feeling rattled after the accident. I remember that night, he said, his brow furrowing. Your sister. She was here late. I saw her in the lobby before she went down to the garage. She was on her phone, really laying into someone, pacing back and forth. She didn't look happy. When she went down to the garage, I heard the tires squeal on the ramp about a minute later. Sounded like someone was in a real hurry. He had seen the emotional state that preceded the act. He was the human corroboration for the data. The final piece came from the evidence I had submitted myself. I rewatched the dashcam footage on my secure cloud server, this time focusing only on the audio. The video showed the SUV lurching forward, but the audio, there was no long, panicked screech of tires. There was the low rumble of the engine, and then, a fraction of a second before the sickening crunch of metal, there was another sound. It was faint, almost imperceptible. A short, sharp exhalation of air, a laugh. I closed my laptop, the screen reflecting my own cold, calm face. I assembled all of it in my mind, creating a timeline, a chain of evidence. The past incident logs from the security database, the corresponding access card data placing Brielle at the scene each time, The invoices from our family's preferred auto body shop I'd found in my parents' files from a previous visit. One for a full front bumper replacement, with no corresponding insurance claim. They had paid cash to bury a previous accident, the public record of the suspended license, the text message proving intent and reliance on a bailout, the security guard's eyewitness account of her agitated state, and finally, the audio file of her laughter. A clear and undeniable pattern emerged. The car was her weapon. The accidents were her way of externalizing her rage, of creating a crisis that she knew our parents would swoop in to solve. It was a form of emotional coercion, a way to force engagement, to punish, to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy, the one who endures, the one who forgives, the one who pays. For years, this tool had worked perfectly in the ambiguous, emotionally charged environment of our family. But this time, she hadn't just hit my car. She had hit a server farm of evidence. Her analog weapon of manipulation had just collided with my digital world of irrefutable fact. And in that world, forgiveness wasn't a family mandate. It was an irrelevant variable. The summons came via a text from my mother on Tuesday afternoon. Dinner tonight, 7 p.m. Your father is making his roast chicken. We need to talk as a family. It wasn't a request. It was a royal command disguised as a domestic pleasantry. The subtext was clear. The pressure campaign was moving from digital pleas to a face-to-face confrontation on their home turf. I knew what was coming. It was the final, most powerful play in their book, the family dinner, a carefully staged event designed to break my resolve through a combination of comfort food and emotional siege warfare. I arrived at precisely 7 o'clock p.m. The house I grew up in was immaculate, as always. The scent of rosemary and lemon wafted from the kitchen. The mahogany dining table was set for 4 with the good china, the silver polish to a gleam. It was a scene of perfect, tranquil domesticity, a stage set designed to make my cold, corporate reality feel harsh and out of place. My parents greeted me with tense, brittle smiles. My mother's hug was a brief, stiff affair. My father's handshake was a little too firm, a gesture of lingering authority. Brielle was already seated at the table, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, offering a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was wearing a soft cashmere sweater, looking young and vulnerable. The performance had already begun. We ate for a while in a silence thick with unspoken words, punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery against porcelain. My father carved the chicken with practiced precision. My mother spooned mashed potatoes onto my plate, asking about my work with a forced, cheerful interest she hadn't shown in years. It was all a preamble, a softening of the target before the actual assault. Finally, as my father poured the wine, my mother laid her fork down and folded her hands on the table, assuming the gentle, concerned expression of the family matriarch. The offensive had begun. "Avery," she started, her voice soft and reasonable. "We understand you're upset. What Brielle did was thoughtless, but we have a solution that makes everyone whole." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "You call the police tomorrow morning and withdraw your report. Tell your insurance it was a misunderstanding. The family will cover every single expense. We'll pay for the tow, the repairs, whatever it costs. We'll make it as if it never happened." It was their classic opening move. The offer of a financial solution to a problem that was never about money. They were trying to buy my silence, to reduce a deliberate act of aggression to a simple transaction. Before I could answer, my father cleared his throat, adding his own strategic layer. "It's not just about the car, Avery. It's about the family's reputation, a police report, official charges. That becomes public record. I have the annual fundraising gala for the trust next month. We can't have the Shaw family name dragged through something like this. It's unseemly. People talk." He swirled the wine in his glass, looking at me over the rim. "It would do a lot of damage to the good work we do. The reputation of the charity, the appeal to the greater good." It was a masterful 1-2 punch of guilt and obligation. Brielle, who had been watching me with a bored expression, decided it was time for her to weigh in. She pushed her plate away, crossing her arms. "Look, it's simple," she said, her tone laced with condescending impatience. "The car is totaled, right? So you need a new one. Mom and Dad will buy you one. A better one. Just tell me what you want. A BMW? A Lexus?" She shrugged. "Consider it a free upgrade. All you have to do is make this go away." There it was, the breathtaking, staggering arrogance. She wasn't offering an apology. She was offering a bribe, brokered by our parents. She saw my car, the first major purchase I had made entirely on my own, as nothing more than a bargaining chip. She believed a new, shiny object could erase her actions, that my principles were for sale. I took a slow sip of water, setting the glass down with a quiet click. I looked from my mother's pleading face, to my father's stern brow, to my sister's smug smirk. They were waiting for me to crumble, to do the math and realize that surrender was the easiest, most profitable option. They were waiting for the old Avery. She was no longer available. I reached into my bag and pulled out several folded sheets of paper, placing them on the table beside my plate. "This," I said, my voice even and calm, "is Section 11 of the Rook and Vale Corporate Code of Conduct." I took the liberty of highlighting the relevant passages. My father squinted at the papers. "What is this?" "It's the company policy on interference with internal investigations," I explained. "It outlines, in very specific legal terms, that any attempt by an employee or a third party acting on their behalf to influence, coerce, or intimidate a witness in a corporate investigation is grounds for immediate termination of contract." I looked directly at my mother. A formal request to withdraw a police report that is now part of an official security file would be considered a textbook example of witness tampering. My mother stared at the papers as if they were a snake. "This is a family matter. Avery, it has nothing to do with your company." It stopped being a family matter the moment it happened on company property, with company personnel, during an active security camera recording, I replied. I turned my gaze to my father. "And it's a very serious liability for the company, one they will not ignore, regardless of who is involved." Then, I looked at my sister. "I love our family," I said, and I meant it, in a strange, vestigial way. "But I have a professional and legal obligation that I value more. I will not compromise my career or my ethics. The investigation will proceed according to protocol." Brielle let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound of pure disbelief. "You're bluffing," she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. "You wouldn't dare. You'd never do anything to actually hurt me. You'd be too scared of what Mom and Dad would do." She still didn't get it. She was still playing the old game, relying on rules I no longer recognized. I didn't say another word. Instead, I reached back into my bag and took out a small, black USB drive. I placed it on the polished mahogany table, right in the center, between the salt and pepper shakers. It was a tiny object in the middle of the grand table, but it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. It contained everything: the dashcam footage of her laughing before impact, the audio recording of my father's phone call from last night, the screenshots of her incriminating text messages. It was the complete, unassailable truth. My parents stared at the USB drive. They didn't know exactly what was on it, but they could see it for what it was: a weapon from my world, brought into theirs. A world of hard evidence had just invaded their soft world of negotiated feelings. As the silence stretched, a sudden, sharp vibration broke the tension. It was my phone, lying face down on the table. I picked it up. The screen lit up with an email notification. The sender was David Chen, head of corporate security. The subject line read, "Incident 734A, formal investigation initiated." I didn't have to say anything. I simply angled the screen so my father could read it. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the words. I saw the color drain from his face. He looked at my mother. A silent, panicked exchange passing between them. The external validation had arrived. The machine was officially running, and it was now far beyond their control. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it shattered. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table. I stood up, my chair making a quiet scraping sound on the hardwood floor. "Thank you for dinner," I said, my voice devoid of anger or triumph. It was simply a statement of fact. I walked out of the dining room, leaving the three of them sitting in stunned silence, their half-eaten meal growing cold. As I closed the front door behind me, I could hear their voices start up again, no longer confident and strategic, but a frantic, fractured whisper. It was the sound of an old world, built on a foundation of unearned forgiveness and unequal sacrifice, beginning to crumble into dust. The dinner at my parents' house had been a declaration of war, but a war I had no intention of fighting on their terms. Their battlefield was one of emotion, obligation, and blurred lines. Mine was the stark, clean, well-lit terrain of corporate procedure. From Wednesday morning onward, I waged my campaign not with angry words or tearful confrontations, but with the quiet, relentless efficiency of a system designed to expose the truth. My strategy was simple: to set a perfect, legally sound trap, and then step back and let my sister's guilt and arrogance do the rest of the work. My first action was to make my recusal absolute. I followed up my verbal declaration to David Chen with a formal, time-stamped email, CCing the head of HR and my own direct supervisor. "Per our conversation," I wrote. "This email serves as my formal recusal from any and all involvement in the oversight, investigation, or adjudication of Incident 734A. I will act only as a reporting party and witness, providing all requested information through the proper channels. All decisions regarding this matter will be deferred to the designated acting lead, Mark Markham." By doing this, I transformed myself from a participant into an instrument of the process. I was no longer the angry sister. I was a source of primary evidence, to be handled with the same dispassion as a security log or a financial report. I could not be accused of bias or revenge, because I had voluntarily relinquished all power. As expected, HR assigned an independent senior manager from a different division, a woman named Carol Brady, to conduct the official interviews. Carol was known for being thorough, fair, and immune to office politics. She called me in first. I sat in a sterile, glass-walled conference room, the kind designed for uncomfortable conversations. I answered her questions with clipped, factual precision. I did not offer opinions. I did not mention family history. I did not describe Brielle as my sister. I referred to her as the other party, or the driver of the secondary vehicle. "Can you describe your state of mind after the collision?" Carol asked, pen poised over her notepad. My primary concern was to secure the evidence and report the incident in accordance with corporate and civil procedure, I replied. "You weren't angry? Frightened?" "My emotional state is not a verifiable data point and is irrelevant to the facts of the incident," I said. "The facts are documented in the video file and the police report I submitted." Carol blinked, a flicker of surprise in her professional gaze. I was treating my own victimization as a compliance audit. The interview lasted less than 15 minutes. When it was Brielle's turn, I was told she was in there for over an hour. In the background, I ensured every possible data stream was being collected, not by ordering it, but by suggesting it. I sent a brief email to David in security. "David, a thought on 734A. For the sake of a complete timeline, you may want to pull the elevator and lobby camera footage between 7:30 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. on Friday. It might provide useful context on the movements of the involved parties prior to the incident." It was a gentle nudge, a helpful suggestion from a colleague. Within hours, they had the footage of Brielle pacing in the lobby, her face a mask of fury as she argued on her phone, just as George, the security guard, had described. Externally, I continued to build a parallel, independent case. I submitted a detailed list of damages to my insurance adjuster, including a request to have the car's event data recorder, its black box, professionally analyzed. The EDR would provide a definitive, second-by-second account of the car's status, including speed, braking, and steering angle at the moment of impact. I also contacted the towing company and paid a small fee for their senior technician to write a formal assessment of the collision dynamics based on the physical damage. His report was unequivocal. The angle and force of impact are inconsistent with a standard parking error. The damage suggests a deliberate, straight-on acceleration into a stationary object. I uploaded both the EDR request and the tow company's report to the insurance portal and forwarded them to Markham for the internal file. Every piece of evidence was being corroborated by an objective, third-party expert. At the office, I executed a policy of absolute avoidance. I altered my route to the coffee machine. I took the stairs instead of the elevator if I saw Brielle waiting in the lobby. If our paths were about to cross in a hallway, I would turn and walk the other way. Each time, I made a brief, time-stamped note on my phone. 3:14 p.m., avoided contact with B. Shaw near the West Wing conference rooms. This created a meticulous log of non-engagement. It was my defense against the inevitable accusation that I was harassing or provoking her. I was building a data trail of my own invisibility. Every piece of evidence, every report, email, screenshot, and audio file was duplicated and saved to an encrypted, cloud-based folder with write once, immutable timestamping. In my world, this was called a litigation hold folder. It was a digital vault, ensuring that the chain of evidence was pristine, unalterable, and legally defensible. For days, I operated on autopilot, a ghost in the corporate machine, letting the process I had set in motion do its work. But I knew that systems, no matter how efficient, could sometimes stall. I needed to apply a small, carefully calibrated amount of pressure to force the final, critical error. I needed to bait the trap. On Friday, exactly 1 week after the crash, I made my only proactive move. I drafted an email to my direct supervisor with a copy to David Chen in security and Linda Harrison in HR. The subject line was Proposal, Proactive Safety Measures for Parking Structures. Hi all, I wrote, my tone relentlessly helpful and corporate. In light of the recent security incident in the P3 garage, I believe we have an opportunity to proactively reinforce our commitment to employee safety. I would like to propose we schedule a voluntary, company-wide town hall meeting to discuss parking structure safety. We could review existing protocols, highlight the extent of our camera surveillance, clarify the procedures for incident reporting, and answer any employee questions. I believe a transparent conversation on this topic would serve as a valuable deterrent to future incidents and demonstrate the company's diligence in ensuring a safe workplace. Happy to help coordinate if you think this has merit. Best, Avery. It was a perfect corporate maneuver. On the surface, it was responsible, constructive, and utterly reasonable. Who could possibly object to a meeting about safety? It was an action that could only be interpreted negatively by someone with something to hide. It was a loyalty test, aimed directly at my sister. An innocent person would ignore it. A guilty one would see it as a public tribunal, a company-wide broadcast of her transgressions. She would feel the walls closing in. She would feel the need to stop it. I hit send, then I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the cityscape. The trap was now fully constructed, baited, and set. I had not touched it directly. I had simply built the machine, supplied it with fuel, and pointed it in the right direction. Now, all I had to do was wait for Brielle to make the one move she was genetically and psychologically incapable of resisting. A desperate, clumsy attempt to control a narrative that had already been written in cold, hard data. The approval for the town hall came back in less than an hour. Management loved the idea. It was proactive. It demonstrated a commitment to safety. And best of all, it was a zero-cost way to look responsible. They scheduled it for the following Tuesday. The email announcement went out, and the clock started ticking. I knew my sister's psychological wiring. She could not tolerate a narrative she didn't control, especially one that was about to be discussed, however obliquely, in a public forum. She would have to act. The first move came less than 24 hours before the meeting. A private text message pinged on my phone. It was from Brielle. I know what you're doing. This town hall is about me. You're trying to humiliate me. Cancel it. You're taking this way too far. I read the message, my expression unchanging. It was a classic Brielle tactic. Frame my adherence to procedure as a personal attack, a disproportionate emotional reaction. For years, it had worked. It had made me question my own judgment, made me feel like the unreasonable one. This time, I felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of a successful prediction. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the text, saved it to my evidence folder with a timestamp, and forwarded it to Markham with the note, FYI, potential for perception of intimidation. My silence must have been more unnerving than any angry response. It signaled a change in the rules of engagement she couldn't comprehend. And so, she escalated. Late that afternoon, an anonymous email landed in the inbox of Linda Harrison, the director of HR. It was a poorly written screed, dripping with faux concern and clumsy corporate jargon. It accused me of fostering a hostile work environment, of leveraging a minor personal dispute to create a workplace witch hunt, and of setting a trap for a junior contract employee in the parking garage. The sender, identified only as a concerned colleague, suggested that my proposal for a town hall was not about safety, but was a calculated act of workplace harassment. Linda forwarded it to me and Markham immediately, as was protocol for any anonymous complaint. I felt a grim smile touch my lips. It was the move of a desperate amateur. She was trying to use the system against me without understanding how the system worked. Markham replied to Linda and me within minutes. It is already tracing the email's header data to identify the source IP address. Standard procedure to verify the legitimacy of anonymous reports. The result came back in less than an hour. The email had been sent from a private, residential IP address. A quick cross-reference with the employee database showed the address was a perfect match for the apartment of Brielle's ex-boyfriend, the registered owner of the SUV. She had tried to throw a rock while hiding in the bushes, not realizing she was standing in a field of freshly fallen snow, leaving a perfect trail of footprints right back to her hiding spot. The clumsy attempt to discredit me had just become another piece of verifiable evidence against her, a documented bad faith attempt to interfere with an investigation. The town hall took place in the main auditorium, a tiered room with seating for 200. Over 100 employees showed up, drawn by a mixture of genuine safety concerns and the irresistible pull of office drama. I sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by colleagues, a notebook open in front of me. I was just another employee, an observer. David Chen from security stood at the podium, his presentation a masterclass in corporate neutrality. He spoke about incident response, the importance of reporting, the legalities of property damage on corporate grounds. He clicked through slides showing diagrams of the parking garage, highlighting the camera coverage in sweeping red arcs. He never mentioned names or specific dates, but the tension in the room was electric. Everyone knew. Then, during the Q&A session, a hand went up in the back. It was a junior marketing associate, someone I knew was in Brielle's social circle. She stood up, her voice feigning a naive concern. "This is all very informative," she said, "but this whole thing sounds an awful lot like a personal issue between two people. Isn't this a bit of an overreaction for what could be a family matter that just happened to spill into the workplace?" It was the question Brielle had undoubtedly coached her to ask. It was the family's core defense, deployed in a public forum. For a split second, the room was silent. I could feel dozens of eyes flicking toward me. David Chen didn't miss a beat. He leaned into the microphone, his voice calm and firm, cutting through the tension. "That's an interesting perspective," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "But our policy is absolute. Any incident that occurs on company property, involving company personnel, and utilizing company resources, even a parking space, is a company matter. We don't have a separate set of rules for people who are related. In fact, it is precisely because personal conflicts can create professional liabilities that we must address them with absolute transparency and consistency." He had taken their argument and turned it into a perfect justification for the company's actions. The air went out of the room. The marketing associate sat down, her face flushed. The trap had been sprung, and the argument had been publicly dismantled. The meeting ended a few minutes later, as people began to file out, talking in low murmurs. I felt a presence beside me. It was Brielle. Her face was a storm of rage and panic. The mask of calm indifference had been incinerated. "Are you happy now?" she hissed, her voice low and trembling. "You got your little public show. You made me look like a monster." I continued packing my bag, not looking at her. I did nothing of the sort. I proposed a meeting to enhance employee safety. "Don't you dare play dumb with me!" Her voice was rising, attracting attention from the people lingering in the aisle. "You've been planning this whole thing, twisting it into something it's not." I finally looked up, my gaze as cold and flat as a sheet of ice. "What is it, then, Brielle?" The question, so simple and direct, seemed to break something inside her. The last vestiges of her control shattered. "It was just a tap," she exclaimed, her voice now loud enough to make several people stop and turn. "A little tap with a car. It's metal. It can be fixed. It's not like anyone died." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous, in the sudden, dead silence of the hallway. Her admission and its shocking lack of remorse were as loud as a gunshot. I saw two senior analysts from the finance department freeze mid-conversation. A project manager I vaguely knew stared, her mouth slightly agape. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They were witnesses, independent, impartial, and utterly credible. Brielle seemed to realize what she had done. The color drained from her face as she saw the stunned expressions around her. She had just confessed, not just to the act, but to the mindset behind it, in front of a dozen colleagues. Before she could speak again, a calm voice cut through the silence. "Brielle?" It was Linda Harrison, the HR director. She had been standing near the doorway. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone was absolute. "Can you come with me to my office, please?" It wasn't a request. Brielle looked from Linda's implacable face to mine, then to the stunned faces of our coworkers. She was trapped, exposed, with nowhere to run. Wordlessly, she turned and followed Linda down the hall. Through the glass walls of the HR department, I watched as she was ushered into a small conference room. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the scene unfold like a silent movie. I saw Linda speak, her posture professional and calm. I saw Brielle's face crumple, her composure finally dissolving into tears. I saw her pull out her phone, her hands shaking, and press it to her ear, her last, desperate lifeline, her call to Mom. I watched her through the glass, her body trembling, her mouth forming the words I knew she was saying, the same old, tired refrain of a life without consequences. "You have to fix this. They have to make her forgive me. You have to make it stop." But from my vantage point, I could see the screen of her phone. The call wasn't being answered. It just rang and rang. The sound a silent scream against the soundproof glass of the room. The safety net was gone. The one number she could always call for a bailout was, for the first time in her life, just a ringtone echoing in an empty room. Nobody was coming to the rescue. The official summons for the disciplinary meeting arrived in my inbox on Thursday morning. The subject was Formal Review, Incident 734A. The location was the Evergreen Conference Room on the 12th floor, a space reserved for board meetings and the most sensitive corporate proceedings. It was known colloquially as the execution chamber. It was a room you never wanted to be called to. I arrived 2 minutes early. The room was cold, the air conditioning a low, persistent hum. A long, dark wood table reflected the recessed ceiling lights like a black mirror. Seated on one side were the arbiters of my sister's fate, Linda Harrison from HR, her expression neutral, David Chen from corporate security, his posture rigid and uncompromising, and a man I didn't know from the legal department, Mr. Thorne, whose thin lips were set in a permanent line of disapproval. They were the system, personified. I took a seat at the end of the table, placing only my phone and a small notebook in front of me. I was a witness, not a party. Brielle was escorted in a moment later by a junior HR manager. She looked small and lost in the vast, intimidating room. Her usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made her movements jerky and uncertain. She avoided my gaze, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route, or perhaps for a familiar, rescuing face that she had to know would not be there. She sat down opposite me, alone. There were no pleasantries. Mr. Thorne from legal began, his voice dry as paper. This meeting is a formal review of the incident that occurred on company property last Friday. The purpose is to present the findings of the internal investigation and to determine if any violations of the corporate code of conduct or contractual agreements have occurred. All statements will be recorded. He gestured to a small digital recorder in the center of the table. He clicked a mouse, and a large screen on the wall flickered to life. We will begin with the primary evidence. The dashcam footage filled the screen, not just the video, but a version overlaid with telemetry data from my car's EDR, which I had authorized the insurance company to share. The room was silent as we watched the SUV lurch forward. On the screen, a small data box showed the numbers. Speed, 9 mph, brake pedal, 0% pressure, steering angle, 3 degrees to the left, a deliberate turn into my parking space, then the sickening crunch of impact. The video was damning, but the data was a death sentence. It proved, beyond any doubt, that this was not an accident. Mr. Thorne let the footage play a second time, this time with the cabin-facing audio. Brielle's short, sharp laugh echoed in the sterile room, followed by her smug declaration, "You'll forgive me. Mom and Dad will make you." I saw Brielle flinch, a physical recoil from the sound of her own voice. "Mr. Chen," Thorne said, not taking his eyes off the screen. David Chen opened a file. He did not look at Brielle. He addressed the table as if reporting quarterly earnings. "Timeline of the incident," he began, his voice a low monotone. At 7:18 p.m., a transaction was recorded at the Gilded Glass on a credit card belonging to the SUV's owner. At 7:40 p.m., the subject, Brielle Shaw, used her access card to enter the P3 parking structure. This was 3 hours and 40 minutes after her contracted workday had concluded. At 7:41 p.m., the collision occurred. At 7:43 p.m., the subject placed a call to her mother. A call which the dashcam audio indicates was an attempt to preemptively influence the reporting party's response. The police were called at 7:44 p.m. He closed the file. The timeline is consistent and corroborated by all data points. "Furthermore," Thorne added, clicking the mouse again, the screen now showed the anonymous email that had been sent to HR. Beside it was a technical-looking screen from the IT department. Our IT forensics team traced the source IP address of this email, which alleged harassment on Ms. Shaw's behalf. A red line snaked across the screen from a server location to a map of Evermere, ending in a pulsating pin dropped squarely on a luxury apartment building. The IP address resolves to the verified home address of the SUV's owner, Brielle's ex-boyfriend. It was sent from his network while he was confirmed to be out of the country. One by one, the pillars of her defense were being systematically demolished by cold, hard facts. She had been there after hours. She had been drinking. She had struck my car deliberately. She had tried to leverage our parents to silence me. And she had orchestrated a clumsy, anonymous email to discredit me and interfere with the investigation. Linda Harrison from HR spoke next. She slid a document across the table toward Brielle. "This is a copy of the contract you signed," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I'd like to draw your attention to 3 clauses. Section 5, which prohibits deliberate or reckless behavior that endangers the safety of personnel or damages company or personal property on corporate grounds. Section 8, which explicitly forbids any attempt to interfere with, obstruct, or provide false information during an official internal investigation. And Section 9, which defines harassment as any targeted action or communication intended to intimidate or cause distress to another employee." Linda looked up. "The investigation has found credible evidence that you have violated all 3 of these clauses." The room was quiet, All eyes were on Brielle, who was staring at the contract as if it were written in a foreign language. This was her moment to speak, to defend herself, to apologize. She said nothing. She just looked around the vast, empty room, her eyes finally landing on me, a desperate, silent plea. She was searching for the old Avery, the sister who would step in, absorb the damage, and make it all go away. She was looking for a savior. Mr. Thorne turned to me. Ms. Shaw, do you have a statement you wish to make? I stood up. I had thought about this moment, about what I would say. I had considered a long, cathartic speech detailing years of slights and frustrations, but standing there, in that cold, quiet room, I realized it was unnecessary. The data had already spoken. All that was left was the principle. Yes, I said. My voice was clear and steady. The entire statement took 12 seconds. For a system to work, its rules must be applied consistently, without exception. I have only ever asked that my safety, and the safety of all employees, be respected as a rule, not as a promise that can be broken. I sat back down. The finality of my words hung in the air. Brielle seemed to shrink in her chair. The last flicker of hope in her eyes died. She finally understood. No one was coming to save her. The family was not here. Only the rules were. Mr. Thorne nodded slowly. Thank you. Ms. Shaw. He turned to face Brielle, his expression like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Given the overwhelming and irrefutable evidence of willful property damage, a deliberate attempt to interfere with a corporate investigation, and the harassment of a fellow employee, the legal department's recommendation to Human Resources is unequivocal. Immediate termination of your contract with Rook and Vale. Effective immediately. A small, choked sound escaped Brielle's lips, but before anyone could react, a soft ping came from Mr. Thorne's laptop. He glanced at the screen, an annoyed flicker in his eyes at the interruption, but then his expression changed. His eyebrows rose slightly. "One moment," he said, holding up a hand. "This is relevant." He turned his laptop so that Linda and David could see. I have just received an email from the lead counsel of my counterpart at the automotive insurance company. They have completed their initial damage assessment for Avery's vehicle. He read from the screen. The estimate is, as expected, a total loss. However, their Special Investigations Unit has flagged this claim. It seems the vehicle identification number of the SUV involved in this incident is already in their system. He looked directly at Brielle, his eyes narrowing. It was connected to a similar hit while parked claim filed 4 months ago, which resulted in a payout of over $9,000 for front-end damage. Their internal audit at the time flagged it as suspicious due to a lack of corroborating evidence, but the claim was paid. Given the evidence from our dashcam footage, they are now reopening that prior claim under suspicion of insurance fraud. The air in the room became impossibly thick. It was a stunning, brutal turn of the screw. The consequences had just breached the walls of the company and were now flooding into her personal life. This was no longer about a job. It was about a potential crime. No one spoke. Brielle sat frozen, her face ashen. The polished surface of the table reflected her pale, terrified face. The entire structure of her world, a world built on the assumption that there would always be a soft landing, a bailout, a forgiveness she didn't have to earn, had just been brought to ruin. The room was as still as the surface of a lake. Just before the ice cracks, the revelation of the potential insurance fraud sucked the last bit of oxygen from the evergreen room. The silence that followed wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a heavy, suffocating presence. Brielle, who had been pale before, now looked translucent, as if she might simply fade away. The problem had metastasized, growing beyond the walls of the company into a full-blown legal crisis. Her life of soft landings had just collided with a concrete wall. Mr. Thorne from the legal department allowed the weight of the moment to settle for a few more seconds before he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Linda Harrison, The signal was given. The time for deliberation was over. Linda cleared her throat, and the small sound was like a gavel striking wood. She picked up a single sheet of paper from the folder in front of her. She did not look at Brielle. She read from the page, her voice a model of dispassionate, procedural finality. Based on the findings of the internal investigation, which have established clear violations of Sections 5, 8, and 9 of the Contractor Employment Agreement, and in light of the new information which suggests potential external criminal conduct, Rook and Vale has reached a decision. She paused, letting the formal weight of her words sink in. Effective immediately, Brielle Shaw's contract is terminated. Her system and building access have been revoked as of 5 minutes ago. She will be escorted to her desk by a member of the HR team to collect her personal belongings and will then be escorted from the premises. She is henceforth barred from entering any Rook and Vale property. Linda placed the paper down and finally lifted her eyes to meet Brielle's. Furthermore, a complete copy of the internal investigation file, including all submitted evidence, will be compiled and forwarded to the Evermere Police Department for their review regarding the matters of willful property damage, witness intimidation, and potential insurance fraud. We wish you well in your future endeavors. The corporate execution was complete. It was swift, total, and mercilessly polite. Brielle didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, hollowed out, the fight completely gone from her. The junior HR manager who had brought her in now stood and gently touched her arm. "Brielle, let's go," like a sleepwalker. My sister stood and allowed herself to be led from the room without a backward glance. I remained seated as David and Mr. Thorne began gathering their papers. The final piece of my own involvement was a single form slid in front of me by Linda. It was a witness statement attestation, a legal document confirming that the evidence I had provided was true and accurate to the best of my knowledge. I picked up a pen and signed my name on the line. My hand was perfectly steady. I had done nothing more than tell the truth, consistently and with documentation. As I stood to leave, David Chen caught my eye. "Avery," he said, his voice low, "your parents are in the lobby outside." Of course they were. The final, desperate gambit. They couldn't influence the system from within, so they had come to intercept me at the exit. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the conference room and stepped into the hushed, carpeted hallway of the executive floor. They were there, standing awkwardly near the elevator bank, looking completely out of place in their casual, suburban attire amidst the sharp suits and chrome and glass decor. My mother rushed forward the moment she saw me, my father a step behind her. "Avery, thank God," my mother began, her voice a frantic whisper. "We've been calling and calling. What happened in there? Brielle just texted us. She said they fired her." "The company terminated her contract for cause," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I did not want to have this conversation here, but I knew it was unavoidable. "I know she was wrong," my father interjected, stepping forward to assume his role as the family patriarch. "She made a terrible mistake, but this is too much. Avery, her career, the police, this will ruin her. Our family can't withstand this." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "You have to go back in there and tell them to stop. Tell them it was a family dispute, that it's been resolved." It was the same argument, the same appeal, just delivered with more desperation. They still believed this was a negotiation, that the rules could be bent if the right person just asked nicely enough. "I can't do that," I said, looking from his face to my mother's. "And even if I could, I wouldn't—" "But we're your family," my mother cried, her voice cracking. I took a steadying breath. "Our family doesn't sign the paychecks here," I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. "This is a place of business. What happened in that room was a business decision based on facts. It had nothing to do with family." "Then make it about family," she begged. "For once, put your family first. We're asking you for one more chance. For her." I said nothing. Instead, I turned my head slightly and gestured with my chin toward a large, elegantly framed document hanging on the wall beside the elevators. It was the Rook and Vale Statement of Ethics, a declaration of principles, integrity, accountability, transparency, that every employee was required to sign. I had helped write the last revision. I just pointed, holding their gaze. My answer was hanging on the wall for the entire company to see. My father followed my gaze and read the words. His shoulders slumped in defeat. He understood. I was no longer speaking his language of emotional debt. I was speaking the language of this building, the language of immutable principle. Just then, David Chen stepped out of the conference room. He saw the tense tableau, and his face became a professional mask. He walked toward my parents, not as a colleague of their daughter, but as the head of corporate security dealing with an unscheduled variable. "Mr. and Mrs. Shaw?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. "I'm David Chen, Director of Security. I'm afraid our corporate policy doesn't allow for non-employees to wait on the executive floor without an appointment." He held out 2 visitor passes. "I can give you these, but you'll need to wait in the main lobby downstairs." My parents were stunned into silence. They were being treated like strangers, like potential security risks, their status as the parents of a senior employee. A status that had always afforded them a certain deference had evaporated. They were just 2 people who were in a place they weren't supposed to be. As my father numbly took the visitor passes, the elevator doors down the hall opened. Brielle emerged, escorted by the HR manager. She was clutching a small cardboard box containing a few sad desk trinkets, a mug, a picture frame, a plant. She walked past us, her gaze fixed on the floor, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask of utter desolation. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at our parents. It was as if we were already ghosts to her. I turned and walked back toward the evergreen room. My purpose clear. I needed to retrieve my notebook. I stepped inside the now empty room. The screen was dark. The table was clear. It was just a room again. As I reached for my notebook, I heard my mother's voice from the hallway. A sound that was not angry or pleading anymore, but simply broken. It was a quiet, ragged sigh, spoken to my father. "We couldn't save her." I paused at the door, my hand on the handle. Her words hung in the air, a final, sorrowful admission of a power they never really had. They had never saved her. They had only ever enabled her, building a cage of consequence-free living around her that had just been shattered. My reply was the heavy, solid click of the conference room door closing, sealing them out and me in. The climax was over. The great, unmovable force of their parental will had met the truly immovable object of corporate and legal procedure, and it had been broken. They couldn't save her, and for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need to. There was no epilogue. There was only the aftermath, a series of quiet, procedural ripples expanding outward from the explosion. The world did not end. It simply reordered itself along colder, cleaner lines. The first ripple arrived as an email on Monday, a week and a half after the crash. It was from the insurance company. The subject line read, "Claim 9B472C, Resolution and Vehicle Replacement." The body was a model of impersonal efficiency. It confirmed my sedan was a total loss and that a payment covering the full market value had been issued directly to my bank. The transaction was complete. But there was a final paragraph, a recommendation from their risk assessment department. Given the documented, deliberate nature of the incident, we have appended a security rider to your policy. We strongly recommend that you arrange for a reserved, high-visibility parking space through your employer's corporate security. Should this not be possible, please inform us so we can adjust your policy accordingly. It was the system's way of saying, we have quantified the threat you represent, and we are taking steps to mitigate it. My family's dysfunction was now a statistical risk factor on an actuarial table. I felt a strange sense of vindication. The second ripple was a company-wide memo that appeared the following day. It was from the Chief Operating Officer. The subject, New Initiatives in Workplace Safety and Ethical Conduct. The memo detailed a new mandatory training module for all employees and contractors on conflict of interest. It announced an upgraded surveillance system for all parking structures and a revised zero-tolerance policy for the use of corporate property or resources in the service of personal disputes. My crisis had been anonymized, sanitized, and transformed into a teachable moment. I was a case study. My experience converted into a bullet point on a PowerPoint slide about corporate liability. It was a strangely comforting thought. The problem was no longer mine. It now belonged to the company, a system far better equipped to handle it. I sent a single, brief email in response to these events. It was addressed to David Chen, Linda Harrison, and Mark Markham. The text was spare. To all, thank you for your diligence and professionalism in handling the recent security incident. Your commitment to procedure is a credit to the company. Best, Avery. I did not mention Brielle. I did not mention my family. I did not mention my car. It was a note of thanks from one professional to another for a job well done. It was the only communication that was necessary. That evening, I left the office at 5. My rental car, an anonymous silver coupe that smelled of plastic and air freshener, felt foreign under my hands. For the first time, I drove down to the 3rd floor of the garage. The tow trucks had cleared away the last of the debris days ago, but a faint, ghostly outline of the incident remained. On the concrete floor, there were still the faded, sprayed markings from the police investigation, chalky arrows and circles indicating points of impact and tire positions. A dark stain, likely oil or coolant, marred the spot where my car had been violated. It was an archaeological site, the last physical evidence of the life I had lived before. I stopped the car, putting it in park. I placed my hands on the steering wheel, my fingers tracing the unfamiliar texture of the cheap leatherette. I remembered sitting in my own car, in this exact spot, my entire body trembling from the shock and the sudden, violent deployment of the airbag. I remembered the ringing in my ears, the smell of burning plastic. I took a deep, slow breath, filling my lungs completely. I held it for a moment, then let it out. The trembling was gone. The shock had been replaced by a profound, unshakable stillness. The chaos had been processed, categorized, and filed away. Order had been restored. In the days that followed, I resisted the urge to explain, to justify, to broadcast my victory. My phone buzzed with texts from concerned friends and curious colleagues who had heard rumors. I answered them all with a simple, "It's been handled. Thanks for your concern." I did not post a single word about it on social media. I wrote no long, self-righteous screeds about toxic families or setting boundaries. I felt no need to perform my story for an audience, to seek validation from likes or comments. The validation had already been delivered in the cold. Clear language of official reports and terminated contracts. I had a single thought, a conclusion that had settled in my mind like a smooth, heavy stone. The truth does not require a defense attorney. It simply is. Late one night, I sat in my quiet apartment, the city lights glittering outside my window. I picked up my phone and opened a new message to my father. For a long time, I stared at the blank screen, wondering what was left to say. There would be no tearful reconciliations, no dramatic scenes of forgiveness. I couldn't unring the bell, but the silence, I realized, was also a kind of cruelty. I typed a single, spare sentence. "I am okay. I hope she learns from this." I hit send. It was not an offer of peace. It was not a request for a response. It was a statement of fact and a distant, clinical hope, a final, closing entry in a logbook. I was now closing forever. I set the phone down on the table. Face up, I watched it, waiting for the 3 dots of a reply that I knew would never come. The screen remained dark. The phone was silent. Outside, the city traffic flowed past my window, a river of light and motion seen through a perfectly clear pane of glass. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm always curious to know where my stories are heard, so please comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Avery's journey. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you want to help this story reach even more listeners, please hit that hype button. It really helps the channel grow.